Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Voorhees, your host. I'm the Editorial Director with Data Science Central and also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Ultrix for sponsoring today's event. Ultrix is an integral supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention and show our appreciation for some of our other recent sponsors, including Tableau, Crowdflower, and Qubole, to name just a few. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you haven't had an opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide some very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. Today's webinar is entitled Improving Advanced Data Prep and Analytics in Spreadsheets. And before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We have two presenters that I'll introduce in just a minute. We'll have 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A following the presentation. And this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. And I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. Now, we'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. So I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers, Emilia Glum and Lisa Aguilar. Emilia has been a solutions engineer at Alteryx for over a year. Prior to working at Alteryx, she worked at an early stage startup focused on leveraging big data to deliver targeted and personalized marketing campaigns, as well as a company specializing in cloud data storage and task management. Now, Lisa is a product marketing manager at Alteryx and is focused on understanding the challenges and needs of line of business analysts and helping them understand how to solve their analytic problems leveraging Alteryx. So Emilia, Lisa, thanks for being with us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. Now, spreadsheets are still heavily relied upon for advanced data preparation and analysis in many organizations, as it's often simply the most accessible tool available. But accessibility doesn't always mean the right tool, especially when it comes to handling multiple spreadsheets, working with larger data sets, or trying to share Excel workbooks. So join us for this webinar as we discuss how self-service data analytics can help you work more efficiently and effectively when working with data in Excel, improve the data prep process, and deliver transparency to your analysis. So in today's webinar, you'll learn some prominent use cases where organizations still rely on spreadsheets, impacts that spreadsheets have on repeatability of data and analytical tasks, the top 3 issues organizations face when considering alternative tools and approaches, and how self-service can deliver a more robust and seamless process to improve data prep. So Lisa, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Great, thank you. How am I coming through?
Just fine.
Perfect, thanks so much, Bill. So thank you, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. Want to take a few minutes to go over what we'll be focusing in on in this webinar today. So we recently commissioned a report by IDC, and we're going to be going over the results of that report. We're going to be focusing on the most prevalent use cases and activities and functions analysts use when conducting analysis. And then we're going to look at the top barriers organizations face when working with spreadsheets, and then some of the recommendations that came out of this report. Then we're going to spend some time going over the benefits of improving self-service analytics, spend a small amount of time explaining who we are and what we do and how Alteryx can complement a spreadsheet environment. And finally, my colleague Emilia is going to be doing a demo on how to augment the process you have and maybe overcome some of the challenges you have when working in spreadsheets. So we recently commissioned a study at IDC, like I said, and this study really focused on the usage and challenges of advanced spreadsheet users. The reality of self-service data prep and analytics has been going on for years, and it continues to be the case today. However, according to this report, about 8% of employees are still engaging with spreadsheets as their go-to software to perform some of these data preparation and analytic modeling functions. Now, that isn't necessarily an issue. The problem is with big data and how it's become mainstream, and it's driven this desire for business leaders and organizations to extract insights from all of their data available. And spreadsheets as the go-to software is starting to cause some issues. In addition to that, IT is having a bigger role in understanding and determining how they as an internal organization can deliver results faster and get answers to the questions that impact businesses faster. Now, this report was based on feedback from over 550 respondents across a wide range of users, and they looked at the usage and challenges of advanced spreadsheet users. Organizations, industries, partners, it really touched on a broad range of individuals within organizations and wasn't skewed by one type of respondent. Now, to dig into the results of the IDC report, 3 of the most frequent uses of spreadsheets focused in on data integration, ad hoc data analysis, and data visualization, with a percentage of these analysis focusing in on what-if analysis, cleansing, pivoting, and preparing that data for presentation into something like a PowerPoint. The percentage of these respondents who perform these functions at least weekly, starting with summarizing data, manipulating, blending data, and building what-if statements, and then going into advanced statistical calculations and formulas, are doing this on a regular basis. Now, what the IDC report found was that those who are performing these tasks are actually spending a tremendous amount of time each week performing these functions. On average, people are spending about 26 hours of their work week per week in spreadsheets. So finding a better way to perform these processes is critical to success and the insights an organization can leverage in making decisions. So how can the process become more efficient? Basically, it starts with some of the basic techniques that a lot of people do. One of the first things that people do when they begin to work on data in a spreadsheet is they make a copy of that spreadsheet. They don't want to lose the original in case something goes wrong. Now, this is the biggest contributor to analytics waste in the process and in working with data. It contributes to wasteful reputation in the data preparation process. It introduces the possibility of human error. It inhibits collaboration, and most importantly, may result in internal policy and external compliance violations. Organizations that don't consider the operational impacts of spreadsheets may not understand their level of risk exposure as well. Organizations who are focused on governance and data lineage should be concerned with users using spreadsheets. A lot of IT departments, when they hear self-service analytics, they often think of the wild, wild west. And spreadsheets are really contributing to that perception. In reality, there is a risk of data integrity. You hear a lot of stories about human errors in spreadsheet analysis. There are multiple cases and stories in the media that show the costly mistake organizations have had to endure due to a single spreadsheet error. Now, given all these concerns, why haven't more organizations turned to an alternative solution? The results of the survey narrow it down to 3 main issues: compatibility issues with other systems, lengthy implementation times, and concerns about high cost. The thing is, perception may not be reality here. The reality of software applications is very different from the perception. Software and applications are now more open and easier to use than before. They're available on-premise, in the cloud, in a variety of options. It's also becoming easier to install and more intuitive, reducing the learning curve and the implementation time. And in regards to cost can be justified since it's more costly for organizations not to use an alternative solution and risk breaching some of their governance policies that they have in place or making decisions based on a spreadsheet error. Now, standalone spreadsheets are not really the problem when it comes to preparing data for analytics. especially when it revolves around cleansing, standardizing, merging, joins, or performing analytic modeling. They're great when you're working on 1 or 2 forms of data, but when you start to expand that data set to 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 15 different sets of data or worksheets, it's going to be difficult not only for that spreadsheet to manipulate the data, it's going to be difficult to keep track of what's happening with the data set and the process. Users of standalone spreadsheets are unable to actually achieve the desired levels of integrity throughout their data preparation and modeling process. Survey respondents from the IDC report indicate large gaps between the importance of data analysis integrity compared to what they are able to achieve in spreadsheets. Now, some of the recommendations from the IDC report are to consider self-service data analytics software as an alternative or complement to spreadsheets. Build a business case for self-service data analytics software based on productivity cost savings, and explain the business case for self-service data analytics software by highlighting additional benefits. Better control, which provides higher level of data analysis integrity, trust, availability, security, and compliance, as well as promote collaboration. Oops, sorry there, getting a little ahead of myself. Ultrix Analytics is a leading platform for self-service data analytics. It provides analysts with a unique ability to easily prepare, blend, and analyze all of their data in a repeatable workflow, and then deploy and share these analytics at scale for deeper insights. We allow users to do this in hours and not weeks. We help analysts collect and cleanse their data from data warehouses, cloud applications, spreadsheets, pretty much any other source, join that data, perform the analytics, predictive, statistical, spatial using the same user interface, and then operationalize those analytics by deploying production processes, schedule and scale analytic workflows, as well as publish analytic apps for customized insights. We really focus on empowering analysts and line of business users to perform their own analytics and rapidly process large volumes of data without having to require any code writing, and output that analytic information in all popular formats. A little bit about how we do this. So it's useful to think of Alteryx as a repeatable workflow to collect, blend, prep, and analyze all your data. First, we enable analysts to access all of their relevant data they need for their analytics, whether that data is stored in Hadoop, a data warehouse, spreadsheet, cloud, on their desktop, in Excel. Data types can be structured, unstructured, or semi-structured. Alteryx can work with and join them all together on common fields or geographic proximity. We also have relationships with some of the leading providers of third-party data, so you can actually enrich your internally collected data for additional insights. And the end result is that you can easily join these data from multiple sources to create the analytic data set that you want for analysis. Next, you can use the same exact workflow and the same intuitive user interface to perform advanced analytics. And like I said earlier, we're talking about all kinds of model development, from predictive, statistical, and spatial. The predictive capabilities within Ultrix are based on the R language. We have created package tools that you can simply drag and drop into the workflow and configure. And these tools require no coding expertise. However, if you are an R programmer, these can be easily customized or even create your own tools that can be reused in Alteryx. Our spatial analytics tools would utilize the data from TomTom to help build trade areas based on drive times or other variables and do sophisticated location or geospatial analysis. Now, once you've actually created your insights, it's really important to share these insights, because if insights aren't being consumed, what's the point of creating them? With a legacy analytic approach, analytic apps and reports often had to be created in another environment or custom coded. With Ultrix, this step is just added to the end of the workflow. You can enable reporting and output to data visualization like Tableau, Click, or Power BI. You can quickly and easily create analytic apps without having to be a developer or code. You could write it back into a data warehouse, and more often than not, you can export it out to Excel or create a static report. Now, spreadsheets are at the core of almost all businesses, and they're never going to be replaced. The purpose here and what we're here to talk about today is to highlight how workflow processes with something like Ultrix can both augment and help many of the processes and tasks that you may be struggling with in spreadsheets. Now, before we can do that, let's just talk a little bit about why people still use spreadsheets. First and foremost, the reason is because most people are familiar with it. And second of all, and in most cases, it's free or low cost. It's already pre-installed on your work machine. What people also like about spreadsheets is that you can instantly see the changes of the data that you make. Now, typically, it will cover most of what an analyst needs to do in their day-to-day work or activities. But free and easy and comfortable doesn't always make it the right tool for the job. There can be issues with working with spreadsheets, as many of you who've worked with them know. The reality is spreadsheets are better for working on 1 or 2 simple data sets. It doesn't mean that you can or shouldn't use it with more than one data source, but when you start to get past 2 or more data sets, that's when you can really run into trouble, both from a traceability standpoint, but also from a scalability standpoint. The other thing is collaboration tends to be a nightmare when using spreadsheets for analysis. We even had one analyst tell us that no one trusts each other's spreadsheets. Trying to determine what someone did, where, and what other worksheets are available is tedious as well as time-consuming. And then what happens when you want to try and do the same type of data manipulation or process? You have to create a macro or write a visual basic. So what can the alternative be from a process standpoint? We believe that workflows is a great way and a better process and a great complement to the work that you're already doing in spreadsheets. First of all, workflows are transparent. You can understand what's taking place throughout each step of the analytic process. It's self-documenting, which allows other users to quickly understand what's happening with the data the moment they look at the workflow and visually see and understand the type of processing taking place at each stage. The self-documenting process can also allow others to utilize someone else's workflow and process these with ease because they're able to understand what's been done at each step. You can share models, collaborate on models, build on someone else's work. It's extremely easy within a workflow environment. In terms of visualizing the data, with spreadsheets you see the data straight away. And with workflow, you can still see the data at each step in the process by running that process. Now, if you're building out a workflow and notice an error, the great thing about a visual kind of layout to working and modeling with your data is that you can go right to that point of data manipulation in the workflow and make the change. You don't have to start over. You're not trying to dig through a spreadsheet to try and figure out what went wrong and where. Another reason for workflows is the simple fact that a large part of your job involves repeatedly performing the same data cleansing and modeling tasks every single time a data set is updated or refreshed. And you're having to produce the same exact report, produce the same exact tasks repeatedly, essentially a time-consuming exercise that's anything but value add or leveraging your skills that you're really bringing to the table. Now, while spreadsheets allow some automation to simplify the process, you need to create complicated macros or visual basic scripts, which means more time spent manual coding and less time analyzing data. A workflow environment actually frees you from that tedious day-to-day task of producing the same reports over and over again, allowing you to build out the analytic process once and then use it again whenever the data changes. Best of all, you can do this in a drag and drop environment that requires no coding. You can even automate that process to run on or during a scheduled time of the day, week, or month, freeing you to take on those high important ad hoc requests from executives, or finally being able to make progress on those larger analytic projects that you've been trying to work on. Now, automating processes like I discussed previously can require the writing code or VBs or building of macros. But what if you want to productionalize your work and make it easier for decision makers to get the analysis and reports they need without having to come to you every single time? This may require putting a visual basic macro at the front end of a spreadsheet and then sharing that out to users and decision makers so that they can automate a process and get the results they need. The struggle can be in maintaining and updating these and ensuring they're working off the latest spreadsheet. Once you start weaving a bunch of formulas, some VBs together, it becomes difficult to maintain, it becomes difficult to modify, and there's no real traceability or visibility in making sure that whoever's consuming this information is consuming it from the latest and greatest data set that you've worked on. A workflow environment like Alteryx can take that process and wrap it up into an analytic application that a business decision maker can then use no matter what their understanding is of Excel or spreadsheets, and they can do it through a browser-based environment, simply as simple as browsing a web and just a few clicks get the analysis or report that they need. Finally, analytic flexibility. Spreadsheets are great for basic analysis and calculations, but what happens when you want to do more advanced analytics? A workflow can incorporate advanced analytics like statistic, predictive, and spatial analysis all within the same platform. Now, with that, I will turn this over to Emilia to have you show you how workflow process can help augment what you're doing in Excel, because hearing is one thing, but seeing is another. So, Emilia, off to you.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Okay. Well, I'm now in the Ultrix Designer. And before I begin building out my workflow, let me begin by giving you a tour around. The Ultrix Designer is the tool you'll be using to build these repeatable workflows. And at the top here is the tool palette. Here you'll find the tools color-coded and divided by their function. We have all different sorts of tools, from bringing in your data to prepping that data, blending it together, all the way through advanced analytics like leveraging our Predictive Analytics suite. Now, after you found the tool you're looking for, you're going to drag and drop it onto the white space here. This is what we call the canvas, and it's where I'll visually build out my workflow. To the left of the canvas is the configuration window. Here I'll configure each tool along the way, and down below is my results window, where I'll be able to preview my data at each point throughout the flow, making it really easy to understand exactly how my data is being transformed step by step. Now, in the use case I'm building out today, it really takes me back to when I was an analyst. I had reports I had to build week after week after week, the same report. Now, in this case, I'm going to build a process so I can automate the building of this weekly report. I'll begin by bringing in my data with an input data tool. Now, if I go into the folder, here you can see I have 7 different files that I need to bring in together in total, 6 of which are all in CSVs. I'll first begin by bringing in my CSV files. Now, because they all have a very similar name, I can read them all in with a single tool, simply by replacing the number with a wildcard. Now, when I run my workflow, you can see I've read in about 2,000 records, and if I look at the messages, I can see that I've read in my data from all of my CSVs with a single tool. Now, one of my regions, well, they don't follow the rules, and they have their data in an Excel file. And so I'll bring in a second input data tool to bring in that Excel file. Now, in addition, of course, to CSV and Excel, there are a number of other different file types we support: Microsoft Access Database, KML files, etc. I've selected my Excel file, and we can see the sheets in it. In this case, I just want my single sheet. And you can see a preview of this data on the left. It looks like it's in a report format. So I can tell it that my first row contains data, and then we can get rid of these 2 kind of report header rows. And I can do that really easily with the sample tool. With the sample tool, I'm able to tell it to just skip the first 2 rows. Now when I run my workflow again, coming out of my sample tool, we can see that we've gotten rid of those 2 extra spacer rows, and now I just need to apply my column headers. Now again, this is easy to do with the dynamic rename tool. I'll drop my tool in here, and in this case, I want to take the field names from the first row of data. When I run my workflow again, coming out of the dynamic rename, you can see that my data has now been formatted in the way I'm looking for. I have all of my field names as my headers and no empty data rows. Now, as Lisa mentioned before, it's easy to go back and see exactly how your data is being transformed step by step. And I can do that by clicking on these anchors. And you can see exactly what the data looks like at each point. So it's easy to see what each tool in the process is doing to the data. Okay, now that I have my Excel file cleaned up, I'm ready to bring it back together with my data from my CSVs. And I can do this with the Union tool. I'll connect both of my data streams. And in the Union tool, I have a few options. If all of my fields are named the same, I can use this auto config by name option. But as is often the case, not everyone's following the rules, and some of them are named differently. So it's easy for me to move that around using this manually configure fields options. I simply select the fields I need to move over and then use the arrows to adjust. And then I'll grab that last region column. Now, instead of having to copy and paste and move my data all around, I can simply align the columns that I want aligned here in the Union tool. Now, when I run my workflow again, all 7 of my data sets are coming out of the Union tool. Now, looking at this combined data, I can see that, there's some different formatting happening here. I have capitals, I have lowercase, I have title case, and I'd really like it to all be uniform before I produce any type of report. And so the next thing I'm going to do is bring in the data cleansing tool. The data cleansing tool allows me to quickly do the most common data cleanup tasks, like replacing null values with blanks or zeros. I can remove unwanted white space, that extra leading and trailing white space that adds that little red tab, or I can remove punctuation. In this case, I'm really interested in modifying the case. I'd prefer everything to be in title case. And now when I run my workflow, my data is now uniform, everything being in the title case format that I'd like. Okay, now the last thing I want to do is update my data types. I brought in all of my data as CSVs, and if I click on the anchor coming out of my data, not only can I see my data in the results window, but I can also see my metadata. The metadata tells me what type my fields are in. Now, because it's a CSV, they're all currently in the string data type, which basically means text. Now, if I want to do any calculations or aggregations on this data, I'll need to first update my data types. And I can do that really easily with the Auto Field tool. Here I can select the fields I want to update. Now, I don't really want to update the zip in case I have, some Boston zip codes with the leading 0. The Auto Field tool is going to look at all of the values in the field and assign the most appropriate data type. And so for zip, if I want to keep it as a string, I'll simply deselect it here. For all of the others, it's going to assign the most appropriate data type based off of the data in that field. Now, going into my Auto Field tool, you can see that everything is a string, as we saw before. Coming out of my Auto Field tool, you can see we have a mixed bag of data types. And it's also compressed the size of my data. So without any thinking or having to know my data types, my Auto Field tool does all the thinking for me. Okay, well now that my customer data is ready to go, the next thing I need to do is aggregate all of the transaction data. And so I'm going to bring another input data tool onto the canvas. This time, I'm going to connect to a database. When connecting to a database, I can use an OLEDB or an ODBC connection. In this case, I've already connected to my SQL server, so I can simply select it here from the list. And I can have a few options when bringing in data from a database. I can bring in an entire table. I can use the Visual Query Builder if I'd like to query that data down further before bringing it into Ultrix, all without having to code any SQL. While I'm making selections here in the Visual Query Builder, the SQL code is simultaneously being constructed here in the SQL editor. This is also where I can put any of my own SQL queries. In this case, I'm going to bring in my entire transaction table. And again, we can see a preview of this data on the left. I have information about each order. There's a customer ID associated with it, as well as dates associated with the order and ship date and the sales. Now, the first thing I'd like to do, or I need to include in this report, is understand how long it takes to ship each order. And so I can make this calculated field with a formula tool. Using the formula tool, I have an option of updating an existing field, or I can create a new field, which I'll do in this case, called shipping time. And shipping time is going to be a whole number, and it's going to represent the number of days between the time that the order was placed and the time the order was shipped. Now, to do that calculation, I'm going to leverage a function from the Functions tab. There are many functions I can use. I can build in conditional if-then logic. I can build in different finance equations or update my strings. In this case, I'm going to use a datetime function, specifically the datetime diff. And I want to calculate the difference between the shipping date and the order date. And I'm going to calculate the difference in days. Because I know sometimes it takes a while for our orders to get out, and it's been negatively impacting our customers. So I really want to make sure I have my finger on the pulse of what that average shipping time is. Now when I run the workflow again, coming out of my formula tool, we can see the new shipping time. It's here on the right. Okay, now you can also see that we have many different transactions, and some of these customer IDs appear in the file multiple times. And that makes sense. It just means they've had multiple transactions with us. But I'd really like to aggregate this data to the customer level, as it is the customers I'm analyzing in this report. And so to do that, I'll bring in my Summarize tool. I'm going to group on the customer ID since I want my data at that customer level. I'm then going to count how many times each customer appears in this file, or in other words, count the total number of transactions per customer. I'm also going to leverage that new field we've just calculated of shipping time and calculate the average shipping time for each customer. I'm also going to sum the sales. And now when I run my workflow again, you can see that my data has now been aggregated to the customer level. I've calculated the total transactions, the average shipping time, and the total sales for each customer. Now let's imagine maybe I want to add in another field that represents the number of days since the last transaction. I can easily add another calculation here in the Summarize tool. In this case, I want to find the most recent order date. And so I'll simply select the max order date. Then I can bring in my formula tool and make another calculated field. In this case, my field's going to be called days since last transaction. And again, it's going to be a whole number. And I'll use that datetime diff function one more time. This time, I'm calculating the difference between the date time now and their last order. Or in this case, the max order date, and I'll calculate it in days. Running my workflow again, you can see that I've now calculated the days since their last order. Okay, now I'm ready to blend my customer data and my transaction data together. And I'm going to do this with a join tool. Now the join tool is very similar to a VLOOKUP. In this case, I'm going to designate my key field that they have in common. which is customer ID. Down below, I can do some cleanup of the data. I can remove the second customer ID field. Maybe I want to reorder some of my fields. I have all different options available to me. I can even rename a field. Perhaps I'll call my max order date my last order date. Okay, and now when I run my workflow, my combined data sets are going to come out of the J output, representing our inner join. Now, if I were to do a VLOOKUP, I wouldn't know easily which fields weren't easily matched up. In this case, I can look at the L or the R output, and this is going to show me what records were unable to be matched with something from our customer data in this case. Well, let's imagine I never want any transaction data to go without having a corresponding customer record. I can set up a test that says there should never be any records coming out of this R output. If I pull in my test tool, I'll add a new rule, and I can say the record count is greater than 0. Now when I run my workflow, you can see it's going to throw an error because we wanted it to have 0 records, and in this case it has 25 records that I wasn't able to match. Now imagine it in the case of I've automated this workflow. It's now running without me having to come into Alteryx and do anything. Well, I'd like to be alerted if some of my records aren't matching up in this join. And I can even set up Ultrix to do that. If I come here to events, I can tell it to send me an email if it runs with errors. And I've just set up my test tool to flag an error if something doesn't match up. So now even when the process is automated, I'm still auditing it by the way I've set up my checks and my workflow. Okay, now the last thing I want to do is create an output. I'm going to output this to Excel, but the key is I need a separate sheet for each region. Luckily, it's easy for me to do this with a single output data tool. I'll write out to my location. I'm going to call it report. And of course, I can save it as many different types. I can write out to Excel. I can write out to CSV. In this case, I'll write it out to Excel. And I'll select sheet 1 for the time being. But what I'm going to do is actually take my sheet name from my field. And I'll just update the entire sheet name. And I'm going to name it according to my region. So now when I run my workflow, this single output data tool has automatically created 7 sheets. If I click on this link, it's going to open that file in Excel for me. And here you can see I have a sheet for each region with that single output data tool. Now, if I wanted multiple outputs, it's easy for me to do that as well. Perhaps I want to output a TDE to build a dashboard in Excel. I can simply add another output data tool, and this time I can write out to a TDE file. And I'll just call it my report data. And now I can update my sheets, create a new TDE, and I have multiple outputs coming from this same workflow. Now, earlier Lisa mentioned that we can also connect to your data in the cloud. If I want to utilize some of our built-in connectors, I can send my data back out to perhaps Google Sheets or Salesforce. Really, the sky's the limit in terms of where you want to send this data because Ultrix is data agnostic. Now that I've automated this prep and blend piece of my workflow and report, I've now freed up tons of time to go into some more advanced analytics. Maybe I want to leverage some of the many predictive models we've created. I can leverage all of these without having to code at all because we've already done the coding in R for you. I simply understand how to configure my tool and bring it in. I can do the same with spatial analytics, or I could even use some of the Ultrix reporting tools to build some really complex reports. And you can see how, as you automate more and more processes, you can go deeper and deeper into your analytics. Thanks for letting me show you the Ultrix Designer today. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Emilia. I was on mute. Apologies, I was talking to myself. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. You know, wanted to talk about the beauty of workflow is that it allows users to stop thinking about data and analytics in rows and columns and incorporates a wider variety of data sources and looks at it as more of a process as opposed to some kind of data task that you have to do. You know, the beauty, again, of a workflow is that really allows users to understand where issues might be or where errors might be in the data process. Data analysts can interact with the workflow using a drag-and-drop workflow environment and easily insert additional data processing steps to prepare and blend and analyze their data. So with that, I'm going to turn this on over to Bill, who will take us into the Q&A.
Well, Lisa, Amelia, thanks for that excellent presentation. We'll get started with today's Q&A session. And I want to thank the audience for their participation. We've had a lot of questions that have come in during the presentation. And we'll do our best to get through all of them in the time remaining. And during this Q&A session, I'll leave up this screen with contact information for Amelia and Lisa if you'd like to contact them following today's webinar. So let's get started. The first thing that seems to be on the audience's mind is, are there any limitations on the amount of data that can be brought into Alteryx? We don't generally think of spreadsheets as having that much data, but I've got an audience member here who talks about 64 tables totaling 2 million lines, feeding a Tableau TDE file. Are there any limitations on the amount of data that Alteryx can consume?
That's a great question. And no, there's actually no limit to the amount of data that you can stream into an Ultrix workflow. So you can rest assured that you're not going to run into that million-row limit issue with Ultrix. I have customers that have run tens of millions of rows of data in Ultrix on their laptop or even billions of rows of data on an Ultrix server. So no need to worry about any data limitations there.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, I guess that leads us logically to ask whether or not the typical Alteryx implementation for an analyst is desktop or is it typically server? And if it's server, can it be cloud or does it need to be on-prem?
Great questions. Typically, we begin with the Ultrix Designer for the desktop. On my laptop alone, I've run tens of millions of rows of data through it. So it is incredibly powerful. Now, if you come to a place where you want to automate all of your workflows to run on a server, perhaps your whole department or company is using Ultrix, then yes, you can deploy the server either on-prem behind your firewall or in the cloud, just depending on your own preference.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Now, a lot of questions have come in that have to do with the whole issue of collaboration, and we understand clearly from your presentation, collaboration is obviously a barrier if we're working in Excel. Now, supposing that two team members are collaborating on a flow to combine data, and they have a disagreement, and what they want to do is to show two alternate paths to the final completed data. Is it possible to have that on a single display?
Yes, absolutely. In Ultrix, you can have, there's a million ways to do the same thing. And if you want to compare your workflows and your processes, the results window where we're able to preview our data at each point makes it really easy to understand exactly how each step is transforming that data. The other benefit of the workflow is that it's self-documenting. So it's easy to see exactly the steps that the data is going through. And you can even add in your own custom notes and annotations. So you can collaborate without even having to really communicate in person. The workflow translates what you're trying to do to your colleagues.
Well, you really anticipated the next two questions. So I can place text annotations directly on the screen so that I can explain to folks what I was trying to accomplish?
Yes, absolutely. You can add different comments for the overall workflow. You can annotate tool by tool. You can add different sections of the workflow. It's very easy to document visually.
Okay, and I think you probably also addressed this next one, but an audience member asked, if we got all the way through with a complex workflow that produced the data combination that we wanted, and then decided that we wanted to drop out a step in the middle. Is that possible to simply drop it out, or do I have to go back and go through the whole logic again? And as part and parcel of that, is there an audit trail or an undo function so I can get back to where I was if I make a mistake?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the nice thing about Alteryx is we're not editing the source data, which means if at any point you want to change your workflow process, you can. You can simply remove a step from the middle, and Alteryx will continue working, and you haven't irrecoverably changed any of the source data. And so certainly you can remove a step in the middle. And in terms of auditing, in our gallery, which is part of the server, we do have version control. So if that's something that's very important to you, being able to revert to previous published versions, then you can do that very easily with our gallery. And of course, you can always just click the undo button in Alteryx if you want to, reverse a little bit and go back to what you just had on the screen.
That all-important undo button.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about how Alteryx deals with multiple workbooks as input. Can you import or export to them if you've already got them set up? And how about Alteryx's ability to deal with, for example, cubed worksheet, multidimensional worksheets?
Okay, great. So you can certainly bring in multiple different workbooks as inputs into Alteryx and write out to multiple workbooks if you've had them set up already. With Alteryx, you don't have to write to an entire sheet. You can write to a named range using the output data tool. So if you have a report built on top of a certain table in your workbook, you can write out to that same table from Alteryx. In terms of three-dimensional or cubed data, currently Alteryx works with two-dimensional data, so we aren't working with cubes today.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. And, if I already had put formulas into my Excel sheets that I wanted to retain, can I have Alteryx automatically extract those formulas from the Excel sheets?
Not currently.
Okay. Now, there are obviously lots of different major systems that folks work with, and our audience wants to know if Alteryx works well with all the major ERPs like SAP and Oracle and PeopleSoft. Are there any limitations that we need to be aware of?
Yes, absolutely. We can connect to so many different databases. Any database that has an ODBC or OLEDB driver, we can connect to. For a complete list of all of the supported databases, you can go to our technical specifications page on Alteryx.com.
Okay, and I meant to ask actually about one that's not an ERP but is pretty common, and that is SAS. Can I bring SAS data in or export to SAS?
Yes, absolutely. You can both read in and write out SAS data.
Okay, terrific. Let me see. There are a lot of very specific questions here that the audience has asked, so let me go back to the specific questions and present these to you. And so we have an audience member saying, is there a way to interact with a workflow and to take decisions with it regarding aggregated figures? I think the issue here is there enough logic in Alteryx to power a decision-making matrix at the end of the data compilation phase?
That's a great question. And yes, with Alteryx, there's so much customization you can build into your workflow that you can build in whatever logic makes sense after you've aggregated and compiled all of your data together.
Okay, thank you. Now, here is a question about conditional branching. So, does Alteryx support conditional branching when linking to different objects and trying to combine data?
Yes, absolutely. So we do have a condition tool that you can set, and that can determine kind of the route that your data takes. Perhaps you set up a condition up front, and then it will take it on path A or path B through the data processes. Yes, that's absolutely possible to set up in your workflow.
Thank you for that clarification. Now, it seems to me that one of the big advantages of having once established a workflow that we all agree on is that I ought to be able to run it lots and lots of times repetitively. Is there a command set that allows me to pre-schedule or to run these Alteryx workflows on a batch scheduled process?
Yes, absolutely. You can schedule your workflow to run on your desktop or schedule it to run on a server with whatever frequency makes sense. If that's once a minute or once a day, you can set up that logic when scheduling your workflows so that you don't have to go back into Ultrix to run it. It's just going automatically for you. Okay.
Now, we talked about collaboration, but let me just be sure I'm clear about this. Can two collaborators work on the same workspace simultaneously, or would they end up overwriting each other's work?
So collaborating on a workflow in Alteryx would work just the same as it would like collaborating on an Excel file. If you save a workflow, it's going to overwrite the existing workflow if you save it with the same name. So unless you have some business practice to build in versioning or author edits into the name, then it will overwrite the workflow in the same way it would an Excel sheet.
Okay, terrific, thank you. Now, would you compare, one of the reasons that we use Excel spreadsheets when we get very comfortable with them is our ability to build, for example, pivot tables. Is Alteryx as capable in building things like pivot tables as is Excel?
Absolutely. We have an entire transform tool category that allows you to aggregate and pivot your data in whatever shape and form you would like it.
Okay. And now we've talked about being able to track versioning of Alteryx. Correct me if I'm wrong, you already assured us that, for example, there is not the limitation of 1 million rows as we sometimes see in Excel. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, good. File systems. Okay, so we talked a little bit about which major ERPs you support. Where would I go to look specifically for the list of file systems that Alteryx supports?
That can also be found on our website on the technical specifications, or you can download the tool and open up one of the input data tools and kind of play around there. The nice thing about Ultrix is we can also bring in unstructured data. So if you want to read it in as a TXT file, that's also possible if you have very unstructured data that you're working with.
Thank you. And one of our audience members has asked a question that I do see from time to time, and that is, have you started to develop templated solutions? Now the question is, are there any modules that are unique or particularly useful, for example, for supply chain analysis? And I guess that would rely on Alteryx having developed some sort of template overlay that new users might use.
We do have a few of those, actually. They're available on our website, Ultrix.com, underneath the resources. We're calling them Analytic Starter Kits. We have a supply chain Analytic Starter Kit, which takes a couple of very common use cases within supply chain modeling and analysis, and it walks you through the steps of how to typically prep, cleanse your data, give you an underlying view of what kind of data you'll need to perform that analysis. We also have one for marketing analytics, customer analytics. In addition, we have one for people who are looking to maybe explore and expand their predictive analytic capabilities if they don't have a lot of experience in that. We have a predictive analytics starter kit that will actually teach you what A/B analysis is, why it's important, how you would use it, and then how you could build that within Alteryx. In addition to that, if you have Tableau or Click or Microsoft Power BI, we do have analytic starter kits that will show you how to quickly output various analytic modeling scenarios and insight scenarios that you can then quickly output into your Tableau, Power BI, Salesforce Wave instance as well. And they're very easy. They're free to download on Ultrix.com. If you don't already have Ultrix on your laptop, you will need to get a trial version of it, but it's a fully functioning version of the product, so you can get the entire package.
Well, thanks. That sounds like a good way to get started. Now, you talked about Alteryx generating R code, and two questions from our audience. What can the audience users modify that R code? And what about Python? Does Alteryx support Python?
Yep, that's a great question. So for our custom-built R modules and our predictive tools, you can, for most of the tools, actually open it up and see the R code that's going on behind the scenes and make any edits and updates there. We also have an R tool that allows you to easily embed any R modules you've created directly within your Ultrix workflow. Now, in regards to Python, we do have the ability to we have a run command tool, which means you can call any external program as part of your Ultrix workflow. So if you have any scripts that you'd like to run, you can use that run command tool to do that.
All right. Now, here's a question from someone that clearly has had some experience moving data in and out of Excel, and it has to do with Excel formatting. When we use Alteryx with spreadsheets, is the Excel formatting preserved so that when we then export to Excel, or will the user then have to reformat Excel to get his formatting back?
If you're overwriting the sheet, yeah, the formatting will be preserved.
Okay, terrific, terrific. Lots and lots of very specific questions have come in. Here's one that could potentially be useful in a specialized situation, and that is the calculation of something called net workdays, which is something that Excel will do for you. Will Alteryx also do a net workdays calculation, eliminating, for example, weekends and holidays?
You can certainly set up a formula to do that, but it's not one of our built-in functions.
Okay.
But the benefit of Ultrix is you can create your own macros within the tool. And a macro is really just a workflow that's been packaged up into a tool. So if there's any custom calculations or processes that you're doing time and time again, you can build your own custom Ultrix macro for that.
Terrific. Well, hey, Emilia, Lisa, thank you so much. Great answers to some very good questions.
Bill,
yes.
Would you mind if there was just a couple of ones that I keep seeing pop up, so I just wanted to elaborate a touch on some of the great answers that Emilia has already stated and questions that you've already asked, because they seem to keep reoccurring. A lot of it comes back to working with larger data sets and smaller data sets within Alteryx. And just to make sure everybody understands, Alteryx actually processes data in two different ways. We use in-memory, so processing the data actually on the Alteryx Designer, using your desktop or your laptop to process the data. And we also use in-database analytic processing, so packaging up all of the analytic model that you're trying to create and pushing it down into your big data source, so you're not having to extract large data sources. That's not what you want to do. You can push down that analytic process and just extract the answers out. There are a couple of questions on huge data sets. If you don't want to actually work with the entire data set, you can quickly and easily sample out a data set within Alteryx. You can use our sample data tool. It'll pull a set amount of data that you can then use and work on your Ultrix Designer desktop and perform some of those analytic tasks in memory, but you can take advantage of the full entire data set because of our in-database processing capabilities that we offer. In addition, there were some questions about data governance and auditability. Now, one of the things is Alteryx is that visual pipeline on how workflows are built, and they solve a lot of those challenges. Not to mention there's an underlying XML code in the workflows that can be parsed out for further auditability. And then there was one other point on terms of like the sharing and the version controlling and the collaboration. Alteryx actually makes it very easy to share and collaborate on workflows. You can package up a workflow, quickly push it onto your own private analytics gallery in which other departments who have the right access can access that workflow, pull it down, either build upon it, maybe manipulate it if they prefer to. And like Emilia also pointed, we have that version control happening. So should somebody be making edits or adjustments to your workflow that aren't right, you can look at the versions and see what happened where and go back to the previous version that you wanted to go to. So just wanted to take that last minute to kind of address a lot of the questions that were coming in.
Right. Oh, thank you for that last clarification. We're kind of out of time. And for those of you that have asked questions that weren't answered today, we'll be sending all those unanswered questions to Lisa and Emilia and the Ultrix team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. Now, I have just a few quick announcements. If you'll please mark your calendars for February 14th, Valentine's Day, and our next DSC webinar, How to Keep Your R Code Simple While Tackling Big Data Sets, to be presented by Title Scale. Also remember that today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the home page of Data Science Central in the Webinar tab, located at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions, and a special thanks again to Alteryx for their sponsorship and our speakers today, Lisa Aguilar and Emilia Glum, for their insight into today's topics. Now, my name is Bill Voorhees. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on February 14th. Have a great day.